When I walked into my father's house that evening, I could still smell the food. Roasted chicken, garlic bread, something sweet, maybe pie. The kind of smell that usually meant warmth, laughter, and home. But the table was already empty. Plates stacked neatly in the sink, napkins crumpled, chairs pushed back like the party had been over for hours. My chair was gone. Just gone. The space where I used to sit looked like it had never been mine at all. My mother looked up from the kitchen counter, surprised but not really. She smiled the way people do when they're pretending everything's fine. "Oh, you made it?" she said, like I'd shown up uninvited. My father didn't even turn his head at first. When he finally did, he said, "We didn't know if you were coming." His tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either, just flat. The kind of voice that tells you the decision to wait had never really been up for discussion. I laughed quietly, though nothing was funny. "I said I'd be here," I reminded them. My sister was already scrolling on her phone, half listening, half gloating. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. It wasn't about being late. It was about something else. Something they'd already decided without me. I stood there, holding the small wrapped box I'd spent the last hour decorating. It suddenly looked childish, like I'd brought a gift to the wrong house. I tried to place it on the table, but there was no space left for me. Not even an empty plate. Not even a chair to sit in. My father cleared his throat and said, "We saved you some food." But there was none in sight. I nodded anyway. I didn't want to beg for leftovers at my own family's dinner. They went back to talking about things I didn't know. Inside jokes, plans I hadn't heard about. Their voices blurred together, soft and distant, until I felt like I was watching them through glass. My father laughed at something my sister said. My mother touched his hand. It looked like a family photo I'd been cropped out of. I smiled, though my chest burned. I wished them good night earlier than they expected, pretending I had somewhere else to be. My mother said, "Drive safe," like she was talking to a stranger. As I stepped outside, the air was cold and sharp. I looked back through the window one last time. They were laughing again, plates gone, lights warm. That was the moment I realized something had changed forever. I wasn't family anymore, just someone who used to belong there. And as I walked to my car, gift still in hand, I promised myself I wouldn't forget that feeling. Because sometimes it's not the fights that end a family, it's the silence after dinner. That night, when I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed and opened my phone. My hands were still shaking from pretending everything was fine. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity has a cruel way of winning. My sister had already posted the pictures. Bright, happy, filtered just right. My parents were smiling beside her, faces glowing in the light of the candles. The cake was in the center of the table. The same cake I'd helped pay for. I stared at every photo, swiping slowly, waiting to see myself somewhere. But I wasn't there, not even in the background. The angle of one picture showed my empty chair, tucked neatly under the table. My gift wasn't anywhere to be seen. It was like I'd never existed that night. Just them. Just laughter. Just the family they wanted the world to believe in. For a long time, I couldn't move. My phone screen lit the room with that quiet blue glow, and it made everything look colder. I remembered every birthday growing up, how I'd save money from part-time jobs to buy Dad something small, something thoughtful. One year, I made a video of old home clips. He'd cried back then. Now he didn't even wait 20 minutes for me to arrive. I scrolled through the comments. "Beautiful family," someone wrote. "So much love." I almost laughed. Love. That word had lost its meaning in our house a long time ago. Maybe this was their way of keeping it alive, by pretending, by cutting out the parts that didn't fit the picture. And lately, that part was me. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that maybe it was all in my head. But the silence in that room, the way my mother avoided my eyes, the way my sister smirked when I walked in, it all made sense now. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was deliberate. As I lay in bed, the laughter from those photos echoed in my mind, a sound I wasn't part of anymore. I didn't know it yet, but the distance that started with one missed dinner wasn't an accident. It was a decision. One they'd made long before I ever walked through that door. There was an unspoken rule in our family, one no one ever said out loud, but everyone seemed to understand. Whoever disagreed too much stopped being included. It never came suddenly. It crept in, slow and careful, like a shadow spreading across the floor. At first, it was small things. Decisions made without me. Plans formed in group chats I was quietly removed from. Laughter at stories that I didn't recognize anymore. I'd ask what they were talking about, and my sister would say, "Oh, it's nothing," while my mother just smiled, that soft, dismissive smile she always used when she wanted me to stop asking questions. I tried not to take it personally. Families fight. Families change. That's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about a fight. It was about control. My father had always been the center of gravity, and the rest of us were supposed to orbit around him. The moment you drifted too far, you became the problem. I learned that the hard way when I started saying no. No to his opinions, no to his plans for my life. That was the first time I noticed how quickly warmth could turn into cold politeness. When I finally asked my mother about it, she tilted her head and said, "You're too sensitive." Her tone was gentle, almost rehearsed. It was the same tone she used when I was a kid and asked why my brother got the better room, or why I wasn't allowed to decorate the Christmas tree that year. Back then, I believed her. I thought maybe I really was the problem. Now, I just heard the same old line, a way to keep me quiet. After that, I stopped asking questions. I started watching instead. Every conversation I wasn't part of, every laugh that ended when I walked into the room, every pause when I spoke, they all built something invisible between us. A wall, brick by brick. And the worst part was how natural it felt to them, like it had always been this way. There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who once loved you. You start measuring every silence, every glance, wondering when you became too much to include. I told myself I'd let it go, but the truth is, you can't let go of something that's still tightening around you. And in that quiet distance, I began to understand. This wasn't temporary. It was the new rule. The next morning, I went back to my parents' house to drop off something I'd forgotten. The place was quiet, sunlight leaking through the curtains, soft and cold. That's when I saw it. My father's birthday card, still sitting on the side table exactly where I'd left it. Unopened. The edges of the envelope were clean, untouched, like no one had even bothered to pick it up. My handwriting stared back at me, uneven and hopeful, suddenly looking like something a child had written. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at it, trying to decide if I should say something or pretend I didn't notice. When my father walked in, he barely glanced at me. He poured himself coffee, humming, calm as ever. I finally asked, "Did you see the card I left you?" He looked over, then at the envelope and said, "Oh, I thought that was from the mail." Just like that, flat, empty. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell him it wasn't just a card. Inside was a letter, one I'd written carefully late at night, telling him how proud I was of the life he'd built, how much I still looked up to him despite everything. He'd never read it, or worse, he didn't care to. He moved on to another topic before I could reply, asking about work, about my car, anything but what mattered. My mother walked past me with a stack of dishes, her eyes flicking toward the card, then away. I realized she knew too, and chose not to say a word. That silence said everything. When I left the house, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the front door. It hit me that they hadn't just forgotten me. They'd decided to. I'd spent years trying to prove I was worth the space I took up at that table, worth being waited for, worth being remembered. But that card lying there, unopened, was the final proof that I wasn't. As I started the engine, something shifted inside me. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was resolve. If they wanted me invisible, I'd show them what it really meant to be unseen. I didn't want revenge. Not then. I just wanted balance. But sometimes, balance begins where love ends. It was almost a month before I heard from them again. I'd stopped expecting their calls by then, so when my sister's name flashed across my phone, I hesitated before answering. Her voice was strangely soft, almost sweet, the kind of tone people use when they want something. She said the family business was in trouble. Some accounting confusion, she called it. Unpaid taxes, missing files. Dad was stressed. Mom wasn't sleeping. They just needed a little help. Your kind of help, she said. For a moment, I almost laughed. Suddenly, I was family again. Not the forgotten one, not the problem child, just the useful one, the one who could clean up their mess. I asked her how bad it was. She sighed, dramatic and rehearsed, then said, "We'd rather show you in person." 2 days later, they showed up at my apartment, unannounced, smiling like nothing had ever happened. My mother handed me a small basket of fruit. My father gave me a firm pat on the shoulder. The act was almost impressive. Not once did they mention the birthday or the card still unopened on their table. They just talked about family sticking together in hard times. I said yes, not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go to pretend. Maybe a part of me was curious, maybe even vindictive. I told myself it was just professional curiosity, but it wasn't. It was personal. They gave me access to the books, a pile of folders, and a drive filled with statements. At first glance, it looked like sloppy management, missed deadlines, duplicated entries. But the deeper I went, the less accidental it looked. Some transactions didn't add up. Numbers moved in circles, money flowing into accounts that shouldn't exist. And every single one of those accounts led back to my father. He'd always told me honesty was what held our family together. Now I could see that was a lie too. Every smile, every dinner, every speech about family loyalty. It was all built on deception. That night, I sat alone at my desk, surrounded by papers and silence. I realized the night of his birthday, the dinner I'd missed, wasn't just a celebration. It was a distraction, a way to close ranks while keeping me out. I thought I'd been excluded out of cruelty, but now I knew. I'd been excluded out of convenience. That night, I stayed up later than planned, apartment lights low, laptop bright in the dark. I plugged the drive in and opened the folders without pretending to be casual. Bank statements, invoices, a web of emails, paperwork that usually hides in plain sight. At first, it looked like sloppy bookkeeping. Then the pattern sharpened. Shell companies under odd names, transfers looping back, payments routed through accounts that shouldn't exist, names and signatures tracing back to him. My father used to say, "Family business stays in the family." It used to sound like pride. Now it sounded like a warning he'd built into habit. This was less about care and more about control. He arranged numbers like chess pieces so he could move them when it suited him. I followed the lines until they led to accounts with his signature, to invoices that disappeared, to deposits labeled as consulting that were anything but. Holding that evidence felt wrong and necessary at the same time. I had spent years trying to earn his approval, showing up for promotions, answering late-night calls, buying gifts that said, "Look, I care." None of it bought me what he held: influence, a different currency. And suddenly I had the ledger. Power arrived as weight. It pressed against my ribs, unfamiliar and real. My hand trembled as I opened another file and saw how easily one disclosure could unravel them: an audit, a flag transfer, a simple subpoena, and the house of cards would begin to tremble. I pictured the headlines, the freezing of accounts, the quiet fear on his face when he understood he no longer controlled the narrative. It wasn't pleasure, not like a victory. It was responsibility, and that surprised me. I felt the ledger's pull, the knowledge that I could expose them or hold it like an unspoken threat. I could choose balance or ruin. That choice sat heavy, a new axis in my life. For the first time, I was not the one who needed proving. I was the one who could force them to answer. I closed the laptop, the light from the screen cutting the room in half. The ledger was just numbers on a drive, but in those numbers I felt a shift. I wasn't invisible anymore. I had become the consequence. That night, I felt the future tilt, and I knew I would decide soon. I told them I'd come by to help sort through the mess, that I'd found a few small things in the books worth double-checking. My father sounded almost pleased on the phone, his tone full of that fake relief people use when they think they've got you back where they want you. When I arrived, the house smelled like roast and lemon polish, familiar but hollow. He opened the door with a smile that didn't touch his eyes and said, "Look who decided to come home." They'd set the table again. This time, they waited. My chair was back in its place, the good plates laid out, everything arranged like a performance. My mother fussed over the dishes, my sister poured wine, and my father kept up the act, asking about work, my apartment, my quiet life. Then he said it, that little jab wrapped in fake concern. "You must get lonely, living like that." I almost laughed. It was the same tone he used when he talked to employees he planned to fire. I let him talk, nodding when he bragged about his resilient business. The one I now knew was stitched together with lies. Every sentence he spoke was another rope around his neck, and he was pulling it tighter with every boast. My mother stayed mostly silent, smiling at the right moments but never meeting my eyes. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she'd always known. When the plates were cleared, I finally said it, casually, almost kindly. "I found some discrepancies in your reports." He looked up from his glass, a flicker of irritation crossing his face before the mask slipped back on. "You wouldn't understand," he said, waving his hand like I was a child talking about adult things. But I did understand. I understood everything: the fraud, the manipulation, the way they'd pushed me out to keep their secrets safe. For a moment, the air shifted. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered, and in that split second, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Small, fleeting, but real. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't sitting at that table to earn a place. I was there to watch them realize they'd lost control. And that realization had only just begun. After that dinner, I began to see every word they spoke as a thread I could pull. My father's arrogance, my sister's whispers, even my mother's careful silences. Each one said more than they meant it to. So I started recording. Nothing dramatic, no hidden cameras or elaborate setups. Just a small recorder in my pocket, voice memos labeled like ordinary notes. Each time I visited, I'd press the button and let them talk. At first, it felt wrong. The sound of my own father's voice, casual and cruel, made my stomach turn. He'd talk about adjusting figures, about clients who didn't need to know everything. My sister was worse. She called it creative math. They thought they were clever, invincible, untouchable. I learned to keep my face still while they spoke, to smile when my father bragged about cutting corners, to nod when my sister said, "No one ever checks." I didn't do it for revenge, not yet. I did it for truth. For once in my life, I wanted proof that I wasn't imagining it, that the coldness, the manipulation, the cruelty were real. Every recording was a mirror, showing who they really were when they thought no one was watching. Weeks passed, and they started to relax around me again. My father called me partner. My mother sent food home with me. My sister joked about family teamwork. I smiled, played along, helped organize files, even fixed a few to make them look legitimate. The more they trusted me, the deeper they sank into the comfort of their own lies. They thought they'd rebuilt the bridge between us, but I was just laying the foundation for their fall. Late at night, I'd sit at my desk and replay the clips, my father laughing about knowing the system, my sister saying, "If anyone asks, we lost the receipts." It was all there. Greed, deceit, arrogance. Each word, another stone in the wall I was building against them. I realized something then. Betrayal doesn't happen when people hate you. It happens when they think you've forgiven them. That's when they let their guard down. That's when they show you the truth. So I let them believe I'd moved on. I laughed when they did, toasted their recovery, and smiled when my father said, "We're stronger now, as a family." Every smile I gave was a trap. Every visit, another step toward the edge. They didn't see it. They couldn't. Because they still thought I was the forgotten one, the quiet one, the one who'd given up. They didn't realize I was recording every word that would someday undo them. And the cruelest part? They thanked me for helping. They called it a thank you dinner. My sister said it was to celebrate the business finally getting back on its feet. I knew better. It wasn't gratitude. It was a performance. One last show before they quietly pushed me out again. But this time, I wasn't coming as the quiet one. I was coming as the one who finally saw through the act. When I arrived, everything looked perfect. The table set with polished cutlery, the candles lit, the smell of roasted meat in the air. My father greeted me with that same politician's grin. My mother kissed my cheek like the past months hadn't happened, and my sister poured wine like she was the host of some charity gala. It was almost impressive how normal they could pretend to be when the truth was crawling under their skin. Dinner started light. My father toasted family unity. My mother said how proud she was that we'd pulled together. My sister smirked at me, raising her glass. I played along, smiling, eating, nodding when appropriate, but my heart was beating steady and cold, because I knew what was coming next. Halfway through, when the conversation turned to how grateful they were for my help, I reached into my pocket and placed my phone on the table. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room, clear, confident, unmistakable. "You just have to know how to manipulate the tax codes," he said on the recording, laughing. "The system's built for people like us." The sound echoed off the walls. My mother's fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate with a sharp clang. My sister went pale. My father froze, jaw tight, eyes darting between me and the phone like he was trying to decide whether to deny it or destroy it. "You wouldn't," my sister whispered. "I already did," I said quietly. "Copies are with your partners. And the tax board." The silence that followed was like a vacuum. No one breathed. No one blinked. My father's face drained of color, and my mother's lips trembled like she wanted to speak, but couldn't find the right lie fast enough. I turned off the recording and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Then I picked up my fork, took another bite of food, and finished my meal in silence. For once, they were the ones who didn't have a place at the table. For once, I was the one who got to leave them sitting in the cold. The fallout came faster than I expected. Within days, investigators were at their office doors, asking for statements, documents, explanations. The business accounts froze overnight, their phones rang without answers, and the partners who once toasted with them now spoke only through lawyers. My father didn't call me, didn't even try to reason his way out of it. He just stopped looking at me altogether, as if ignoring me could erase what I'd done, or maybe what he'd done to himself. My mother showed up at my apartment once. Her face was tired, the kind of tired that comes from realizing the story you built your life around was a lie. She didn't sit down. She just stood in the doorway, eyes glistening, and whispered, "You didn't have to do this." I wanted to tell her I did, that this was the only way to make them see what they'd become. But the words stuck in my throat, so I just said, "I didn't lie." She nodded slowly and left without another word. My sister wasn't as quiet. She called me names. Selfish, cruel, ungrateful. "You've destroyed us," she screamed through the phone one night. I let her, because she was right about one thing. I had destroyed something, just not what she thought. I hadn't destroyed our family. I destroyed the illusion that we were one. For weeks, I felt nothing. No triumph, no regret, just a strange, heavy silence. Revenge isn't loud like people imagine. It's quiet. It's the way a house feels when the laughter stops, the way footsteps echo in empty rooms. I'd imagined that moment 100 times, thought it would feel like victory, but it didn't. It felt like standing in the wreckage of something that was always meant to collapse. Still, in that quiet, I started to breathe differently. The weight I'd carried for years, the guilt, the judgment, the constant need to prove my worth, began to lift. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to belong to people who built love out of control. They finally saw me, not as the quiet disappointment they could shape, but as the consequence they created. And for once, I didn't feel guilty for letting them drown, because the truth isn't what destroys people. The lies are. I just stopped protecting theirs. Months passed before I went back to the house. I told myself I was only going for closure, but part of me just wanted to see what was left. The drive felt longer than before, the air heavier. When I pulled into the driveway, the place looked smaller, older, like it had aged with the truth. The curtains were drawn, the garden overgrown, and the porch light flickered weakly, as if unsure whether to stay on. Inside, the silence hit first. No smell of food, no clinking dishes, no laughter spilling from the dining room. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the slow creak of the old clock in the hallway. My mother wasn't there. My sister had moved out. Only my father remained. He was sitting in his usual chair, staring at nothing. The man who once filled every room with noise and authority now seemed smaller. His shoulders curved inward, his confidence hollowed out. He didn't speak when I walked in. Neither did I. The silence between us carried years of words we'd never said, apologies that would never sound right, pride that would never soften. I stepped closer and placed something on the table beside him. The birthday card. The same one I'd left untouched months ago. The envelope was still sealed, edges yellowed at the corners. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't even notice it. But then his hand, shaky and slow, reached out. He turned it over once, twice, as if unsure what to do. Then finally he opened it. I watched as his eyes scanned the words I'd written long ago. "I'm proud of you." His lips parted slightly, but no sound came. His eyes filled, the kind of tears that come too late to mean anything. I stood there, calm, steady, feeling nothing and everything at once. I wanted to believe he understood what those words cost me. how hard it had been to write them, how impossible it was to mean them now. Some part of me still wished he'd earned them, but he hadn't. Some debts, once due, can never be repaid. And as I turned to leave, I realized the house had become a monument to that truth. A house without laughter, echoing with what could never be fixed. On his next birthday, I didn't drive to their house. I didn't call or check the time or wonder what they were doing. I stayed in my apartment, cooked a small dinner, and lit a single candle on the table. One plate, one chair. No noise, no pretending. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels earned. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the pull to prove anything. I didn't scroll through social media looking for their faces. I didn't wait for a message that would never come. I just ate, slowly, letting the silence wrap around me like something warm instead of empty. It felt strange at first, to choose solitude, to sit in peace instead of pain. But that strangeness soon turned into relief. By then, their name had become a headline, whispered through business circles, dissected in meetings. Their empire had collapsed under the same lies they built it on. My father stayed out of sight, my sister left the country, and my mother called once, her voice thin and tired. "We never meant for it to go this far," she said. I told her I knew. And I did, because it was never about the money. It was about power, about control. And once you live outside of that, you start to see how fragile it always was. I looked at the candle burning low and thought about that first dinner, the one where they didn't wait for me. For so long, I thought that moment was rejection, the start of my exile. But sitting there alone, I finally understood it was something else. It wasn't an accident. It was an invitation, a moment that said, "You don't belong here anymore." And maybe you never did. I thought about the unopened card, the empty chair, the laughter that went quiet when I walked in. They used to hurt. Now they didn't. Because I hadn't lost a family that night. I'd lost an illusion, a version of love that required me to shrink, to stay quiet, to be less. The candle flickered, then went out, leaving the room in soft darkness. I didn't make a wish. I didn't need to. The peace I felt was enough. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like freedom. Sometimes the cruelest exclusion becomes the greatest liberation, because the moment they stop seeing your worth is the moment you learn to define it yourself.